Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from Antiwar.com, and this is Anti-War News for Tuesday, July 26th, 2022. So we'll jump in here. We got a lot of stuff for you, as usual. The top of the page here. The top story is the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, on Sunday said that Moscow will help the Ukrainian people get rid of the regime in Kiev, suggesting Russia's war aims have expanded even more. Lavrov said in Egypt on Sunday night, quote, "We will certainly help the Ukrainian people to get rid of the regime, which is absolutely anti-people and anti-historical," end quote. So earlier in the war, Russia said that its focus was to, quote unquote, liberate the eastern Donbass region, where the breakaway republics of Donetsk and Luhansk are. And last week, we saw Lavrov say that Russia's goals in Ukraine now expand beyond the Donbass region into the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions, which are west of the Donbass and north of Crimea. So it connects Crimea to Russia. And he also said it could extend into a number of other territories. So it's not really clear yet from his comments on Sunday night if this means that Moscow is pursuing regime change in Ukraine, if that's their goal now, if that's what they're trying to accomplish. We don't know yet. It reminded me of back in March, President Biden declared that Putin cannot remain in power, which was a very provocative thing for the American president to say while he's funding this war on Russia's border and escalating this sanctions campaign against Russia. But the White House quickly walked it back and said that the U.S. was not pursuing regime change in Moscow. But Lavrov is not Biden. He's very different. He's pretty calculated. He's not prone to gaffes. So if he says something, I think he means it. We still don't know if it's real Russian policy right now. And I really combed Russian media today to see if I could find more on this, to see if the Kremlin was asked about it and see if they clarified, but I didn't see that. All I saw was TASS, the Russian news agency, just had Lavrov's quotes in there. So this is another sign that the war is not going to end in the foreseeable future, at least. Last week, Lavrov also said that peace talks don't make sense now because Ukraine, as the US and other Western countries, are pumping these weapons in and they're discouraging Kiev from negotiating. And this past Friday, Zelensky rejected the idea of any sort of ceasefire with Russia, saying that it would give Moscow another chance to prepare for a fresh offensive. And we've seen Biden and other US officials say they're ready to keep supporting this war. So the next one here, Ukraine hopes to ship grain this week under the UN brokered plan. This is goodish news. So we have to enjoy the good news while we have it because it's pretty rare. So a Ukrainian official said Monday that they hope to start shipping grain out of their Black Sea ports this week. The Ukraine's deputy infrastructure minister said that over the next 24 hours, they're going to start working on getting these shipments going, and that they expect within the next 2 weeks that all their ports will be able to export grain again. Since the war started, there's been an estimated 22 million tons of grain locked in Ukraine, stuck because of the war. And a UN official said that the grain shipments could start within a few days. So that's another good sign. The deal was signed in Istanbul on Friday between Russia, Ukraine, the UN, and Turkey. The agreement it established a coordination center in Istanbul that will oversee grain shipments as they travel out of Ukraine and those that leave the Black Sea through the Bosphorus Strait. So now we saw Russia attack the port of Odessa on Saturday, the day after the deal was signed. So that raised kind of some doubts that the deal won't be implemented. But Ukraine kind of downplayed those strikes. They said it didn't do much damage. Russia claimed that it only hit military targets, and Ukraine has since said that they're ready to get these grain shipments going. So that's good. And Russia said that the Odessa strike shouldn't impact the grain shipments. So it looks like this is moving along. And under the deal, Ukraine will escort these ships that are transporting grain and also fertilizer through Ukraine's ports, which are heavily mined. That was the issue. That was why the ships couldn't leave. So I'm not sure if they're going to demine. They're not going to demine the whole port, from what I understand, because that would take a long time. But they're going to clear kind of a corridor for these ships to get out. And when that's happening, Russia agrees not to attack the area. So yeah, let's hope that grain gets moving. The next one here, this is more gas stuff going on. Russia's Gazprom is cutting gas through the Nordstrom 1 pipeline to 20% of its capacity. So they announced this on Monday that they will further reduce gas supplies through Nord Stream 1, which is a pipeline that runs from Russia to Germany. We heard a lot about Nord Stream 2 in the news for years and years, that so many people in Washington had in their sights were trying to sabotage. It would have really expanded the amount of gas Russia could sell to Europe. And now that pipeline, the Nord Stream 2, the construction is finished. From what I understand, it was in its certification process, but it was suspended by Germany around the time Russia invaded. So many of the Russia hawks got what they wanted with that. So Nord Stream 1, it was already running at limited capacity at 40% of its capacity due to delays caused by Western sanctions. There was a turbine in Canada for the pipeline that was being repaired, but sanctions prevented Canada from being able to send it. So the Canadian government eventually agreed to send it back to Europe. And it's in Germany right now, but Russia has been saying that there's still some issues with it. And now they're saying they have to make this another cut to repair another turbine. And, European leaders, they're not buying this excuse, really. They're accusing Russia of using gas as a weapon. But either way, if Russia's move to cut the Nord Stream 1 is not related to the repairs that are needed, then it's obvious retaliation for the US-led Western sanctions campaign against Russia. I mean, they launched these sanctions, Biden and the EU, with the stated goal of destroying the Russian economy, which they failed at doing. So to be surprised by that there's retaliation is really just amazing, and shows how short-sighted this policy was. Almost feels like it was really rushed too, like they didn't think that this could happen, which really, really amazes me. So now Europe is preparing to lose all access to Russian gas, and estimates are that they would have to reduce their gas consumption by 20% to get through the winter, which is huge. I mean, this is going to be a tough winter for Europeans if things don't change here. To really see how these sanctions have totally backfired on the West. So the next one here, so we're getting into China. So this is interesting because we see the U.S. strategy against China is to kind of expand into the Asia Pacific militarily and diplomatically. They're looking to open more embassies and engage with more countries. So I saw this from Defense One today. They reported that the National Guard is considering a sizable expansion in its operations in the Indo-Pacific, which is the area that the U.S. government it's new lingo that we've seen in the past few years. The Indo-Pacific. It includes the Western Pacific, the Western Indian Ocean, and it stretches to Hawaii and it goes south. Australia and the Eastern Pacific near South America. That's the Indo-Pacific. It's this big area where we need to, and up to Southeast Asia, where the U.S. thinks they need to expand their presence because of China. China's the big threat, a so-called threat, I should say, that they cite to justify all their plans to expand in this region. Now we're seeing even the National Guard is talking about it. So this quoted General Dan Hokanson, who is the chief of the National Guard Bureau. And the National Guard, they have over 90 training programs with countries across the world, and more programs are set to be added. And they're planning on adding more of these training programs in this Indo-Pacific region. He said that about half of the countries that they're being considered for new programs are in that region. And the National Guard is currently training in 15 countries in the region, including the Philippines, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, and many others. So it's just an interesting aspect of how, like I said, you see even the National Guard, every branch of the U.S. military is preparing for this expansion in the Asia Pacific. And now, so recently, the Pentagon released its new national defense strategy, which identified China as they called China the top threat facing the U.S. military, a second to Russia, which is interesting. This really shows China is kind of the long term um, issue here, that the U.S. empire has its sights on encircling China more, and their strategy is focused on building up alliances and cooperation against China in the region. And that's what we're seeing with all this Taiwan brinksmanship, this Pelosi trip, all these U.S. warships that we see sailing into the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea. But the previous national defense strategy, released in 2018 under the Trump administration, that outlined the U.S. military shift away from counterterrorism towards this so-called great power competition with Russia and China. And we're seeing the consequences of that today in Ukraine. The U.S. stepped up support for Ukraine in those years by sending more military aid. And we saw the National Guard has actually reorganized to prepare for future conflicts with Russia and China. We've seen the U.S. Army as a whole, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines. They've all put out these new strategies. They're revamping to deal with what they call near-peer competitors, Russia and China. Very different than counterterrorism ops in the Middle East, a war with Russia or a war with China. So the next one here, this really just shows how much the U.S. government cooperates and works with arms manufacturers. So this story: Biden presses chip legislation in meeting with Lockheed Martin CEO. President Biden and Deputy Defense Secretary Kathleen Hicks met virtually with the CEO of Lockheed Martin and representatives from other companies to discuss advancing a piece of legislation that would subsidize the domestic manufacturing of semiconductors. So we've seen a lot about this lately. The U.S. wants to be able to make more semiconductors, more chips domestically. And there was this big, huge piece of legislation last year that passed in the Senate. It was a China competition bill, was how they were selling it, and it would have authorized $250 billion in spending, and a lot of that went to scientific research. It was a very strange bill, but there was about $50 billion in there to subsidize domestic semiconductor manufacturing, and they couldn't get that huge bill through the House. There was over bipartisan issues. The Democrats were trying to stick stuff in. I think it was some climate stuff that the Republicans didn't want in there. So they decided to gut the semiconductor stuff out of that bill and make it into its own piece of legislation known as the CHIPS Act. And it was advanced in the Senate last week, and there's expected to be a vote on it in the Senate this week, a vote on the finalized version of the bill, and then it would go to the House. So Biden in this meeting, the idea of this meeting was to kind of push this chip manufacturing idea. So it would authorize, I think I said, $50 billion in subsidies to boost chip manufacturing. According to Military Times, the legislation would add $79 billion to the deficit over the next 10 years. So the Pentagon and U.S. arms makers like Lockheed Martin, they want the CHIPS Act to pass, as semiconductors are needed to produce advanced weapons. And they also view chip making as a vital part of competing with China. Hicks said at the meeting, quote, "Semiconductors, it's not an overstatement to say, are the ground zero of our tech competition with China," end quote. Hicks also said chips are vital for making technologies from artificial intelligence to hypersonic weapons. And then the Lockheed Martin CEO, he said that they need semiconductors to integrate advanced technologies into their current weapon systems, work on F-35 fighter jets, and develop other weapons. Now, President Biden visited a Lockheed Martin facility back in May that produces Javelin anti-tank missiles, which the U.S. has shipped thousands of these Javelin missiles to Ukraine since the war started. They first started sending them to Ukraine under Trump. Trump was the first one to authorize not advanced weapons to Ukraine that they could use on the battlefield. Since after the 2014 U.S. backed coup in Ukraine, when they backed the ousting of Viktor Yanukovych, the former Ukrainian president, which sparked the war in the Donbass region, Obama was hesitant to send these weapons, and Trump did it. And it was the javelins that they were the first to go over there. So when Biden went to that facility and praised Lockheed Martin for making these anti-tank weapons, and he said that he learned on the trip that each javelin requires over 270 semiconductors to be made. So this is a big part of the reason why they're pushing this bill, is so these weapons makers can make more weapons. There's been issues with, they're worrying that they're not going to be able to make enough javelins or make enough Stingers, the anti-aircraft missiles, which are made by Raytheon. They're both Stingers and Javelins. They're both shoulder-fired portable systems. Um, the Stingers are made by Raytheon, and the Javelins are made by Raytheon and Lockheed Martin together. Raytheon is the former employer of Biden's Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. He sat on their board before becoming the head of the Pentagon. So this next one here, this is from Jason Ditz. So pro-Iran bloc in Iraq's parliament, they nominated who they want to be prime minister. So since Iraq's elections in 2021, nobody's been able to form a government. Sadr, the influential Shia cleric who's not aligned with Iran and who's not aligned with the United States, he's very much independent. His party won the majority in parliament, but he wasn't able to form a government after a long time, and his people resigned. So now we have this Iran-aligned Shia bloc, and they have named who they want to be their premiership. So it looks like they're going to be able to form a government, and his name is Mohammed Shia al-Sudani. So we'll keep an eye on that. It's good. We really try to keep track of all the internal stuff in Iraq, because it's all, a consequence of the U.S. invasion of 2003, toppling the government. And we see this a lot, that all these factions have a tough time when it comes around election time to forming a government. So the next one here, this is also Iraq. So Erdogan, so last week there was an attack in Iraqi Kurdistan on a tourist resort that killed 8 people, 8 civilians, and it was blamed on Turkey. It was pretty clear that it was Turkey from what I saw from the reports from all of the Iraqi reports of this attack, but Turkey rejected it, said it wasn't them, and now they're claiming that it was a false flag trying to undermine Iraq-Turkey ties. So I don't think that there's any evidence to substantiate Erdogan's claim, but it's interesting to see that he's really doubling down on denying this. And this attack has led to Iraq to demand Turkey to withdraw from the areas of northern Iraqi Kurdistan where Turkey has forces and has been attacking Kurdish groups there. A NATO country attacking another sovereign state, and you don't really hear too much about it in the mainstream media there. So the next one here is Iran. Iranian officials, they said on Monday that they will not be rushed into deciding to finalize the nuclear deal, just because everyone else keeps saying that time is running out. So we see this a lot. We see American officials, European officials say, oh, like the clock is ticking. We're not going to be able to revive the Iran deal after a certain amount of time. But they don't really ever say why. This line doesn't really make sense. So they're just saying that they're not going to be rushed into finalizing a deal that's not good for them. Things haven't been looking good on these talks. I mean, the talks have been stalled. Really, what it comes down to is the Biden administration is refusing to give Iran the sanctions relief that it wants to revive this deal. So the next one here is related. This is also from Jason Ditz. He's usually covering the Iraq, the Iran stuff. So IAEA cameras won't return in Iran until the nuclear deal is reached. So the International Atomic Energy Agency, they installed cameras in Iranian nuclear facilities under the 2015 nuclear deal known as the JCPOA. And Iran has kept most of this stuff in place even after the US withdrew from the deal in 2018 and imposed crippling sanctions and sanction after sanction. But they tried to, their strategy in the beginning was to cooperate with the deal. They waited about a year before they started enriching more uranium. They still technically aren't in violation of the deal because the US pulled out, sanctioned them, so they're not obliged by it anymore. And but you don't see this context in the headlines, in the mainstream write-ups of this, of these stories, because now you have the IAEA chief Rafael Grossi. He's always saying, "Oh, we don't know what Iran's going to do. Their Iranian, their nuclear program is galloping ahead." I believe is how he put it the other day. Um, but really, it's these are obligations that Iran doesn't have to, that they were complying with voluntarily, completely voluntarily for the past few years, and now they're not. And it's obvious as the talks, as hopes to revive the deal are fading, they're just trying to use what leverage they have to restore it. That's what it seems like what they're doing. But of course, this is all just hyped up in the media, and there's all this fear mongering about how Iran is going to make a nuclear weapon. But that's nothing new. We've always seen that. um, so that's it for today. We have some good viewpoints today. We have a great one from David Swanson, and many others. Also, we have a good spotlight. This is from the editorial board of the South China Morning Post, which is a Hong Kong-based newspaper that I rely on a lot for the China stuff that I like to cover. And it's titled "Nancy Pelosi Has to Stay Clear of Taiwan for the Sake of Us All." So if people want to check that out, it gives a great argument for why Nancy Pelosi should not be heading to Taiwan. She is reportedly planning to do next month. There's going to be more about that in the news this week. So you'll get your Nancy Pelosi updates, which I'm sure you're all uh, dying for. But anyway, that's it. That's the top news stories for the day. I hope everybody is enjoying the show. You can contact the show news@antiwar.com. If you have any questions, comments, things that you think I'm missing, you can subscribe on YouTube, on Odyssey, download it on your favorite podcast app, and share the show. Tell your friends. And if you want to support the show, the best way to do that is to donate to antiwar.com. You can do that at antiwar.com/donate. So that's it. And I will see you tomorrow with some